Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video here, we're going to be revisiting and talking about, well, the first big mod that I've done to this beloved device right here, the Steam Deck. For those who do not know, this device doesn't really even need that much of an introduction, but in case you don't know, this here is what I've lovingly called a handheld computer. It is not a console, but it is something that is running Steam OS, which is really just a variation of Linux on here, and you're able to play it all like this, play your games, all that fun stuff, but at the heart of it, it is an actual computer. You don't have to use SteamOS. You could use any other operating system on here. It has USB Type-C, so you can use that to hook up a dock. You can output to multiple different monitors. You can plug in USB devices. You can do really whatever you want to on your own computer, like a personal computer or a laptop, desktop, whatever you have, you can do on a Steam Deck. The only thing is, it is a handheld as shown right here, and it has gotten a whole lot of praise since it has come out. Now, I have done one video about this where I was talking about my usage. However, I haven't done any hardware modifications to it. And for some who have a keen eye, you might be noticing that my screen looks a little bit different. There might be some more things on screen here that you don't typically see. And that's because, well, we just ended up replacing the whole screen on here. I ended up replacing this with the DeckHD and the screen replacement kit that it comes with. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Now, I do want to give a disclosure up front here. This video is not sponsored. I was not paid for anything in here. However, the entire device here, really everything in this kit was given to me for free for purposes of review and really this video right here. So I would like to give a shout out and thank you to not only Balika011 because he was really the one who, from what I understand, he did most of the work on the actual hardware here, like, you know, reverse engineering, making it, all that fun stuff, like working on the firmware and everything. And he's the person that I've really been in contact with, but also FX Technology Limited, who it seems like they are the company that is actually, you know, manufacturing and dishing out these things and really selling them at that point. But I do want to give a big thank you, shout out to them, and also just have my disclosure right there. So what I'm going to be talking about in this video, just to break it down for you all, is I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction here. I then am going to also show you the installation process on the Steam Deck itself. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to show the hardware and the software portion of it. And at the end, I'm also going to talk about some issues that I've run into and really my final recommendations. As long as you all are good with that, I'm good with that as well too. Now, getting into this, when I initially saw the DeckHD, it was actually on Balika011's Twitter, in which he showed that he was able to do a screen replacement on the Steam Deck and was able to run this at a 1200p resolution, specifically 1920 by 1200p. Now, if you don't know, the Steam Deck by nature, like when you first get it, it maxes out the screen here at 1280 by 800p, so that is a nice jump. So I was excited about this. It was really cool to see. He was showing me some things as well too, because even disclosure here as well, Balika011, I'd say he's an awesome dude, friend of the channel here. I've covered a lot of his work that he's done, and I primarily cover console modifications, like video game console modifications on here. He's done some great work for the Nintendo Switch, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 2, and now doing stuff on the Steam Deck. And even if you don't find the DeckHD screen interesting, he even did a RAM upgrade recently, and he showed it on his Twitter account, in which he was able to boost the RAM up to 32 gigabytes, which is just really awesome to see modifications like this. Either way, he ended up showing that. He started cluing me in, and I was able to get on a, I guess, review list pretty early just because of that. So when it comes down to it, this here is the DeckHD itself, which again poses itself as an entire screen upgrade kit. It does retail for $99 US, and you can order it from the DeckHD.com website. Now, a comparison of the two here is that the screen resolution, as I said, is boosted. The stock screen is 1280 by 800p. The DeckHD is 1920 by 1200p. Both of them are 7-inch IPS displays. The sRGB coverage range is an 87% on the DeckHD compared to the 67% of the stock screen. You get the same level of brightness at 400 nits. The refresh rate is still going to be the same, so for anyone expecting 90, 120, 144 hertz, you're not going to get it on this screen. And finally, this has a anti-glare coating, which is only on the stock deck as long as you get the highest end model, which is the 512GB model. So for $99, you get a really nice screen here, but this is also a kit. So what else does it include? Well, if we open it up, we can see. Of course, the first thing here is going to be the screen that you're able to see. Now, the one I'm currently holding in my hand, this is actually the stock screen, but it's still representative of this. You do get a screen inside of here. When you open it up a bit further, there's also some added goodies at the bottom of the box. One of the things is you end up getting this nice little ribbon connector right here, which connects from the screen itself to the motherboard. Now, it is nice that they included one of these in here, and I have a suspicion they probably included this because I have a feeling that this is probably one of those ribbon connectors that some people might have issues with breaking. So the nice thing is you have a spare right off the bat. You don't have to use this one, but if you damage yours in the process, then you got this thing right here. It also comes with a toolkit as well. So in case you're worried about not having the right tools, it has almost everything you need. Inside the toolkit, you get a Phillips head screwdriver, a little spudger tool, some tweezers, one of these kind of like poking, flattening type tools, a suction cup, and not one, not two, but 3 picks that you can use to separate the screen. So really, this is nice that it comes with everything you need, almost everything. I keep saying that because there's going to be a few other things you're going to need for this. If you're going to do this installation yourself, you're also going to need a hair dryer. They also say that you could use a heat gun, but I wouldn't recommend that just because misusing a heat gun, especially on plastics like this, you can really have a bad experience. So I would just say get a hair dryer. It's less powerful, but that's really what we want. It's hot enough to get this all separated. So you will need a hair dryer of some kind. You're also going to need a keyboard, a mouse, a USB Type-C dock of some kind. It doesn't matter whether you use the stock one or third party, as long as you can connect your Steam Deck to an external display of some kind, you will need that. You're also going to need something to remove old thermal paste, such as Q-tips and isopropyl alcohol, and of course you're going to need new thermal paste. For me, I'm using Arctic brand MX4, just because that's what I have on hand and it works pretty well. So that is everything that you should need in order to perform this installation. Now the fun part here, let's go ahead and cover the installation itself. So there's going to be 2 parts to the installation here. There's going to be the hardware and the software. I am going to tell you all, if you do want to follow along with this, whether you're installing a DeckHD or you're just going to replace the screen with another screen, like, you know, if your screen is damaged and let's just say you pick up a stock one, you can actually still follow the hardware portion of this. I will say though, with the software portion, it's a little bit, how do I say? I'm saying this lovingly, but it seems like it's a little bit hacky in some ways. What I'm saying here is I have no doubt that the software portion of the installation will probably be refined by a little bit at one point. So what I would recommend doing is if you are going to follow along with the software portion of this, you might want to just read up on the software installation side of it on the website and then use the video as a supplemental here. But if you are doing this all and you're trying to follow along with this, I'm pretty confident in saying the hardware installation is not going to change. That's going to remain the same. Now, if you have any questions about this, I am going to have links for everything down below in the description in regards to what I'm referencing on the DeckHD site. And there is a great setup guide on there which I followed. So this is really just going to be a video adaptation of this. But first of all, one of the things that they do recommend is charging your battery, just depleting it to under 25%. It is a recommendation. I didn't do that personally, but to prepare this, just it wouldn't hurt to have a low battery percentage on your deck. Next, as an added precaution, they do recommend putting the Steam Deck itself into a battery preservation or battery saving mode, which is essentially going to purposefully brick your console, or I guess deck in this case here. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how to resolve that here, but in order to get into that, you're going to have to fully power off your Steam Deck. Then while it is powered off, you're going to hold down the volume up button and tap the power button to turn it on. Keep holding down the volume up button until you get to the BIOS menu. Then you're going to go down to the setup utility and enter the setup utility. At that point, navigate over to power, find the battery storage mode, and tap A on it to enable it. It's going to ask if you're sure you want to enable this, and then say yes. Once your system powers down, you're going to notice that the LED is going to be flashing for the battery itself, but you will not be able to turn on the system. Don't panic, that is to be expected. So make sure you do anything that you want to on your deck prior to this here. However, once you have that all set up, go ahead and unplug any type of cables that you have to the deck and remove any micro SD cards that you might have. The next thing is going to be the actual DeckHD installation, which they do recommend allocating about 2 hours of time. I will say this is certainly not a race. With me never doing this before, following along with the guide and also recording the video, this took me about an hour 15 minutes. It might take you longer, it might take you less time, but do keep in mind, I think 2 hours is pretty appropriate to allocate to this here. So what you're going to want to do is take your Steam Deck, flip it upside down. Remember, make sure it's disconnected from anything, make sure you don't have the micro SD card inserted, and you're going to take your Phillips head screwdriver and you're going to then remove the 8 screws on the back of the Steam Deck. Now you are going to have the Steam Deck upside down, so I might recommend putting it down on like a mat, like an anti-static mat, or even like a towel or an old shirt of some kind, so you're not going to damage anything there. Do keep in mind that 4 of them are 9.5 millimeters long, and 4 of them are 5.8 millimeters long. Really, the ones in the middle are going to be the shorter ones, so just keep that in mind. For this here, I end up taking the flat black tool here, and I just went to one of the triggers and I just kind of started putting it in the crevice right here, and you will start feeling it kind of pop open. And once you get the first tab open, you're just going to want to go down the side and then go down the bottom and start popping it off. Next up, you are going to be careful doing this, but once you get most of them there, you're going to want to do the same thing on the other side. And once you have everything popped, you should be able to safely remove the back cover of the deck. So now this is what the deck's insides look like, but we are going to have to get in here a little bit further. So there's going to be a little piece of foil tape. Go ahead, take your tweezers and gently and slowly remove this. There's going to be several stickers we're going to remove throughout this whole process, so I recommend removing them slowly, carefully, and keeping them somewhere safe so we can reapply them here within the next hour or two. But go ahead, remove this. And once that has been removed, we're going to remove the single 3.4 millimeter screw that was hiding under there. Then we're going to remove 2 more 3.7 millimeter screws at the top and bottom on the left side of the shield. Keep in mind these sizes right here, so make sure you have everything stored properly so you're not mixing up screws. Once all 3 of those screws are removed, you can then gently remove the shield itself and keep it somewhere safe. From here, we're going to disconnect the battery. Even though we have it in that battery preservation mode, we're going to go ahead and disconnect it because we don't want to do all this while we have live power going to the system in any way. So go ahead, find this cable right here, this kind of flat black cable, and make sure you can kind of pull at it a bit and then firmly but gently go ahead and disconnect it from the motherboard itself. And yes, this little tiny rectangle here is the motherboard. That's the entire heart of the Steam Deck. With the battery disconnected, let's go ahead and remove the SSD. So there's going to be 1 screw here holding the SSD in here. Simply remove this 3.4 millimeter screw, and at this point, you're now going to remove the SSD. You really just need to lift up on the SSD and gently pull it away from the motherboard and the socket that it's in. And once it is pulled out, definitely make sure you keep this somewhere safe. This has your operating system, your games, all that stuff on it, so keep this safe. Now here's our second sticker we're going to get rid of. It's going to be this heatsink sticker right here. You're just going to do the exact same thing. Take your tweezers, come over here to one of the edges, and gently and slowly pull up on it to remove the sticker in one piece. Once it is removed, again, keep this somewhere safe. We're going to reapply it later. With that, let's disconnect our fan. This is pretty simple. Find the fan, find the wires that are coming from it, and find where it is connected to, then gently disconnect it from the motherboard. There's now going to be 2 screws that we have to remove. One of them is going to be a captive 3.5 millimeter screw on the left of the heatsink, and the other one is going to be at the bottom of the heatsink, which is a 3.4 millimeter screw. Once the bottom screw is removed and the left screw has been loosened, we can then gently remove the heatsink just by gently lifting up on it here. And this is where you're going to need to repaste this later on. Just be careful, you don't want to get thermal paste all over the place, but it's going to be on the chip itself, and it's also going to be on the heatsink once you remove this. We can now also work on removing the Wi-Fi shield tape. So it's going to be this piece that is underneath the SSD. At this point here, we're just going to, again, gently and slowly lift off on this sticker, for lack of a better term, right here. With that pulled off and somewhere safe, we can now work on disconnecting the speakers as well as the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth. So for this, go ahead and find the same wire connector that is similar to what we had to disconnect for the fan and disconnect that. Then there's going to be these two other antenna connectors right here. You're going to just gently lift off on both of these. I really just recommend kind of coming to it and lifting directly upwards on these. You don't need a ton of force for any of this, just make sure you do it properly. You'll now need to disconnect the display itself. So you're going to look for the ZIF connector that is in this area. It's going to have a MB on it. You're going to want to unlatch the connector right here and then gently disconnect the ZIF connector itself. On the far side, you're now going to disconnect the button board. You're going to look for another one of these connectors right here, really this ribbon that has a DB on it. Exact same thing right here, lift up on the latch and then disconnect this physically. There will now be 3 motherboard screws that we have to remove in order to get the motherboard out of our system. So there's going to be 2 up at the top and 1 at the bottom. These are all 3.7 millimeters. Now, in order to remove the motherboard itself, on the bottom left of the motherboard, there's going to be a thin layer of double-sided tape that's going to hold down one of the button board cables. What you want to do is kind of just gently get in between to loosen up and disconnect it from itself. Make sure you're not damaging this, but you just want to make sure it is unstuck from itself. And once it has been unstuck from itself, you're going to lift on the motherboard from the left side and gently move it over to the right. Be careful here because on the right side of the motherboard, but underneath, so when we are pulling it out, there's going to be another connector that we're going to have to loosen up and disconnect. This here is going to be the audio cable. It's going to be the same process as before when you flip the motherboard upside down. You're going to disconnect the latch right here for this that says MB. And there's also going to be another connector right here that is on the other side, close to where the micro SD card goes. You might as well disconnect this as well too. So now with the motherboard completely removed, we're going to disconnect the screen connector. So this is going to be just underneath where the motherboard was. And you're going to see this whole connection right here. What you're going to do is go ahead and do the exact same thing as all the other stickers. Take your tweezers and you're going to start gently lifting off on this here. And then once it has been gently lifted off, you're going to see the exact same process as before. You're going to disengage this latch and then gently pull this to disconnect the connector from the screen itself. Now, if you're following the guide, it says to peel off the display connector here, and I feel like you could probably just still keep that in. Regardless, though, I'm still going to follow what the guide is saying here. So what you need to do is just like all the other stickers, you can use your fingers at this point, but you're going to gently lift off and away while you're pulling up the screen connector. You're going to gently lift off and away from the actual system itself so you can get it out of here. And just be very gentle with this because this is a connector and we're going to put it back in. Thankfully, like I said at the beginning of the video, there is a backup one that this does ship with, but if we don't have to use that, then we're not going to use that. Now at this point, this is going to be the hard and difficult and nerve-wracking part of the installation. We're now going to remove the display itself. This is where you're going to want to take your hairdryer. And again, I recommend using a hairdryer for this if you can. I really wouldn't recommend using a heat gun here, but let's go ahead and use the hairdryer. So for this, what I did essentially is I went to each corner, and this is going to take you a few minutes here. So you want to pick which corner you're going to start with. I personally chose to start with the bottom right, and make sure your console is, of course, face up now at this point. You're then going to, if you're going to follow what I did here, I ended up taking my hairdryer. I ended up turning it on to warm at first just to kind of run it here for maybe 10-15 seconds. Then I ended up turning it to hot, and I put it on high. And I kept it about an inch away while I was moving it back and forth in this general direction. You're not heating up the entire screen. We're only going to do one corner at a time. It's really just recommended when you heat this up, do it for 1 minute. So if you're using a hairdryer, heat it up just in this general area about an inch away maybe for 1 minute. And once 1 minute has passed, turn off your hairdryer. Now you're going to take your suction cup and put it in the corner here and start lifting up on this. You are going to have to use some force. Don't use a ton because we don't want to damage the old screen here, but use enough that you're going to see the screen is going to start physically pulling away a little bit. It's not going to be a ton, but you're going to see it's just a tiny bit. It's going to become a little bit separated. And when you see that, you're going to take an opening pick and you're going to start just gently but firmly jamming it between the plastic and the screen itself. Once you get it in there a little bit, you really don't want to insert it all too far. You just want to insert it in far enough where you're going to break away the adhesive. So you're going to want to go on the bottom of this, and you're going to want to go on the side of it. And I'd say go no more than halfway each side. Go no more than halfway vertically and go no more than halfway horizontally, because again, we're going to heat up every single corner individually. Now, the nice thing is, as I said, you don't get one, you don't get two, but you get 3 opening picks. And the intention of this is so when you have one of these edges popped, you can keep a opening pick right there so you have it elevated. Awesome idea. I absolutely love that. So what you're going to do is when you have this separated, take the opening pick and just keep it jammed in there. So you make sure that it is still elevated. Now move to one of the other corners. For this, I end up going to the top right. And you're going to do the exact same thing here. If using a hairdryer, heat up this general area for about 1 minute on high, about 1 inch away. Once you've done that, you're going to do the exact same thing. Disconnect your suction cup if you haven't already done so before, which you should do before you heat it up again, and then connect the suction cup onto the new second corner. Then you're going to do the exact same thing. You can actually even use the previous corner to kind of get you started on this new one. So you can go over to where your work finished previously and start your new work from there. Just go ahead and work around the edge itself. And again, you're going to want to disengage, part of it there. The idea here is that one side should be fully disengaged and the other side, you should not go more than halfway. Now you're going to do the exact same thing a third time. I'm not going to get into the granular details here, but keep your second pick right here, disconnect your suction cup, go over to the third area, heat it up for 1 minute, put the suction cup on there, and then use your third pick to disengage this. This should be easy enough for you now if you've done this twice successfully. So now that the third one is done, we have the fourth and final one. At this point here, you've noticed that we have 4 corners but only 3 picks. So we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to disengage the suction cup, go ahead, heat up this corner for 1 minute, and then once it's heated up, put the suction cup on there. And I'd recommend at this point, take the pick from your first corner that you worked on and remove it, and then move over to the final corner and disconnect this. Once it has been disconnected fully, like it has been removed from the adhesive, you are all good at this point. To gently lift up the display, you really just need to take the suction cup, put it onto the display, and gently lift it here. This display should be disconnected from the console itself because of that screen connector, so you should be able to take the old screen and put it somewhere safe. If it's not broken, don't throw it away or anything, just keep it on hand. You'll now need to prepare these surfaces. So what you'll need to do here is clean all the edges of the frame that have any extra adhesive. You are going to want to take a spudger, so really that flat black tool, and just go ahead and scrape any of the old black adhesive that you see from there. It also does recommend in the guide, if you want to, you can clean this up quickly as well, like clean up any extra stuff that's hard to get to with some isopropyl alcohol, but I noticed I didn't have to do that, thankfully. There wasn't all too much that was left there, but I was able to clean it up well enough. Now you'll also notice you're going to have 5 adhesive strips, and what you're going to want to do is while these adhesive strips are still on the actual packaging themselves, I'd recommend just take each one and kind of figure out where these ones go. When you figure out where each one goes, you're going to gently remove that adhesive strip from the actual package and then stick it onto the flat piece where that strip is going to go. Make sure you have all 5 on there nice and settled. Once they are all installed back in the frame itself, you can then take your flat black spudger tool and just run over each one really well, like 1 or 2 times, so you make sure it sticks incredibly well to the actual Steam Deck frame itself. Then you're going to lift up on the tweezers and pull off the adhesive liners, so that way you can activate the adhesives. We now get to install the new display. So at this point here, you should make sure that your DeckHD screen has been removed from the packaging, make sure everything looks good with it. And at this point, you are going to make sure, you do need to make sure and ensure that the connector for this screen is going to match up where this should go on the motherboard. So make sure the connector is going to go into that same hole and match. And at that point, you can then gently place the screen onto your Steam Deck and drop it into place. Once it is dropped into place, you can take something such as a microfiber cloth and firmly and really well just go along all of the edges, every single edge, just firmly press down maybe 2 or 3 times all around, so the screen is stuck very well to the Steam Deck itself. And at this point here, let's go ahead and put everything back together. Even though it's really just working backwards at this point, I'm still going to walk you all through it. But first, before we do that, let's actually clean up the old thermal paste. It's going to be so much easier to do while everything is out of the system. What you're going to want to do is, if you're following along with what I'm doing here, you're going to want to take your motherboard, put it flat somewhere, also take your heatsink, and then start removing the old thermal paste. Now what I did was I removed some of it manually just with a dry Q-tip here, and then what I ended up doing was taking some isopropyl alcohol, I saturated my Q-tips really well, and I went onto the actual heatsink surface itself, as well as the chip on the motherboard, and I cleaned it up extremely well. You're going to want to make sure that the die itself is nice and shiny and clean, and just remove as much of the old thermal paste as you can. And you're going to also want to make sure that the thermal paste on the heatsink is also removed. This will probably take a few Q-tips and a few rounds of isopropyl alcohol to fully remove everything. Once these are all clean, we can now work on reassembly. For this, let's reconnect that display. You're going to want to take that display cable that you either ended up removing or the new one that you got, and you're going to put it back into place. Just do the exact same thing here. Make sure it is all lined up. It is stuck right there. Make sure that the part that is supposed to connect to the motherboard is sticking out, and then make sure that you can connect this to the actual panel itself. Now we can put the motherboard back in place. You're going to work backwards on here as we are doing. So you're going to want to take both ribbons that you disconnected, make sure you put them in place, and then drop the connectors on them. There's going to be 2 on the bottom of the motherboard. Make sure you end up putting both of those in place. Then you can put your motherboard back into the proper place where it once was. You can now take your 3.7mm screws, screw in the one at the bottom near where the SSD would go, and put 2 in at the very top. Be sure to reconnect the button board as well. This is going to be on the far edge of the system. It's going to connect into here, and it will have DB on it. Just do the same connection right here. We can now also connect the display to the motherboard. You're going to want to take this ZIF connector that says MB and do the exact same thing. Place it in here and then put the latch down on it, and it should connect nicely. Now let's connect up these speakers and the Wi-Fi. We're going to want to connect these speakers to this same connection right here, but then for the actual 2 antenna here, this might be a little bit difficult, and really what I've found has been best is to really take this, line it up from the top as best as you can, put it in place, and then to make sure it is flattened, you're going to want to take a black spudger and gently but firmly press down on it. And once it clicks and makes a connection, you can even try to lift it a tiny bit, and as long as it doesn't come off, it is connected. You're going to connect both of these properly. They also do need to be in the proper respective connections, so you don't want to mix them up, but you're also going to notice that when you're connecting everything here, it's pretty much guided. You're going to have a good feel for it. Be sure to put the Wi-Fi shield tape back on here as well too. We're going to need that later on for the SSD. We can now come back up to the top right of the motherboard and make sure the fan is connected here. Very important, you don't want your Steam Deck to overheat. We're now going to put the heatsink on here, but before we do this, let's go ahead and take some of our thermal paste. For this, again, I am using Arctic MX4. You can use whatever you want to as long as it's good and it works, and I just end up putting a dab of it right here. Now, I personally, everyone's going to have their own way of doing it. I personally don't spread it just because once we have everything situated and pressurized and screwed in, it's going to automatically spread itself. But you can just put a dab on here like so, and then take your heatsink and gently pop it into place. There's then going to be 2 screws that you have to screw in. There's going to be the captive screw that you'll have to screw in place, and there's also going to be a 3.4mm screw on the bottom of this heatsink that you have to put in place. With the heatsink screwed back in, go ahead, take your heatsink sticker and reapply it. It's the same as before. We can now take the SSD and make sure we slot it in properly, connect it in there, and once it is firmly connected, be sure to take the 3.4mm screw for the SSD and screw it back in place. I'd say this is also a pretty good point here where we can reconnect the battery, so reconnect the battery. Now we're going to take the shield, pop it back into place, and we're going to re-screw it. Remember, at the top and bottom, there's 3.7mm screws, and in the middle where it was hiding, like the top right, I guess, there's going to be a 3.4mm screw. Once all those are screwed in, go ahead and take that little piece of foil tape and put it back over this screw. We're in the home stretch at this point, you all. take the back cover, go ahead, pop it on, and click it all around. Just push it down so you make sure it all connects properly. And then at that point, once it is nicely connected, we're going to put all the screws back in. The far edges are going to have 9.5mm screws, and in the middle, there's going to be 5.8mm screws. Make sure they're all in place. And at this point, your deck should be reassembled and all good to go. And if you did it successfully, nothing should be damaged, everything should be working. And on top of that, you should also not have any leftover screws or stickers or any of that fun stuff. Now, to test and make sure this is working here, you're going to want to take a power cable and plug it into the deck itself. Go ahead and let it turn on. You might panic because the screen is not going to look proper, but that is totally fine. We're going to fix this here. Once it has turned on, you're going to then hold down the power button and shut it down. Once it has shut down, disconnect it from the power and turn it on again. If it turns on successfully, at that point, that all means that you did this properly. You should be good to go here. So congratulations, the hardware portion is all successfully completed. Now we're going to move on to the software portion of this. And I am going to say here, again, another disclaimer, if you're following along with this as a guide, the hardware portion should not change, but the software portion, I'd recommend just going over to the DeckHD.com setup page, double check the instructions there, and then you can use this video as a supplemental because things might change with the software side. Now for the software portion, this is where you're going to need an external keyboard, an external mouse that can be wired or wireless, however you're going to get them connected. And from here, you're then going to make sure you can hook them up to a dock so you can hook it up to a monitor or a TV of some kind. Once you have everything connected there and you have it displaying out, you're going to want to make sure that your SteamOS is at least version 3.4. If it is not, you're going to want to get this updated here, but if you're on at least 3.4, you are okay to do the rest of this here because we are going to have to do a BIOS patch. So once this is all good at this point, you're now going to hold down the power button on the Steam Deck itself, and you're going to exit to desktop mode within SteamOS. Once you're in SteamOS, you're going to want to open up a browser, and you're going to go on the Steam Deck itself. You're going to go to the DeckHD.com website, and you're going to go to the flashing BIOS section. So really just the software portion that we're going to look for. There's going to be a script that we need to download. Make sure you download this script, and I'd recommend move it over to your desktop. Next, we're going to have to set a password on here if you have never done so. So for this, I haven't done it on mine. You're going to need to open up the start menu here. You're going to need to open up console with a K and open this. Then you're going to type in password, as in PASSWD, and hit the enter key on your keyboard. It's then going to prompt you for a new password. The most important part is that you're going to remember it. So you're going to need to make sure you settle on a password. It is case sensitive, and you're going to type it in. When you start typing it in, you're going to notice that there's nothing on the screen to show that you're typing it in. You just need to trust the process right here. So enter in the password you want and then hit enter. Then re-enter that same password and hit enter. As long as you have typed it in properly both times, it should now be applied to your SteamOS. Once that's all good, you can now close out of that. We can now right-click on the BIOS desktop download program that we downloaded, and you're going to go to Properties. When the Properties window opens up, go to Permissions and enable the checkbox for Is Executable, then go ahead and apply or OK this right here. Now double-click to run the BIOS desktop download program, and when your sudo password prompt ends up coming up, you're going to enter in that same password we just set. It's going to go through the flashing process, and your Steam Deck is going to restart. Just leave it alone for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes just in case. And it is noted here as well too in the written guide that in some rare cases the Steam Deck will boot up with a white screen. They do say this is a known issue at the moment, and a forced shutdown, so long holding the power button, should do the trick. Now once it's all been flashed and you're good to go, you should notice that when you boot up your system now, each time you boot it up, it's actually going to have the DeckHD logo on the BIOS splash itself, which I think is a nice little touch right there, and also confirms that the BIOS has been flashed successfully using this utility. Now, this is also a step that I had to do. Hopefully you all don't have to do it here, and I'm going to put a link down below in the description for this page just in case. Since I did get an earlier revision of the DeckHD, the actual screen itself required a firmware update. So what I had to do was I had to find the page on how to update the firmware for the DeckHD itself. I know we just updated the BIOS on the Steam Deck, but I also had to do this on the screen. Hopefully you don't need to do this, but I'm going to put this in here just in case, like if there's a firmware update that rolls out for the screen and you all need to update. You're going to again want to go into SteamOS, then go into desktop mode, then find the page on the DeckHD site for flashing the touch panel or TP firmware, and then you're going to want to download the link there, which is for the touch.desktop.download file. We've already set up a sudo password, so that should be okay, but then you're going to need to find that download, right click it, go to properties, go to permissions, enable the checkbox for is executable. Double click the touch desktop download program, then enter the sudo password whenever you're prompted and let it do its thing. Now it does say once the console is finished here, it is going to close out, and once it is closed out, you're going to want to do a hard restart on your Steam Deck itself. And when your Steam Deck restarts, it might stay at the Steam Deck logo for up to 10 minutes. Trust the process, let it do its thing. And at this point here, the software side of house is done. We have now patched the BIOS to work with the DeckHD, and just in case you need to update the screen firmware, we've also done the same thing there. So overall, those are my thoughts and coverage on the installation itself here. Now, what did I personally think of it in terms of difficulty or what have you on there? I will say here, you got to keep in mind that I'm a person where, you know, I've built a desktop several times. I like to take apart, repair, modify game systems, other proprietary things as well. So this is nothing really too new for me. I've never worked on a Steam Deck, so this is the only one I have that I worked on. However, I found it pretty manageable. I guess I'll say this. If you've ever successfully taken apart a laptop and then you've been able to replace the screen, or even more specifically, if you've really ever taken apart a phone, really any type of proprietary thing, but if you've taken apart a phone and you've done a battery replacement or a screen replacement, you should be fine on here. The Steam Deck, it's not going to be as easy to take apart as a desktop, but it's not going to be nearly as difficult to take apart as something small like a phone or a tablet of some kind. But if you've worked on devices like that and you've been successful with them, I'd say the Steam Deck is fine here as well too. Just make sure you follow the guides, and you just, even if it takes you 4 hours to install it, just make sure you do that, because you're going to want to make sure you do everything properly here and you don't want to break anything. As for the software side of house, it does seem it's pretty easy to do, I'll say, thankfully, to the guides that were put out on there. But do keep in mind, this is not going to be something as easy as just drop it in and you're done and that's it. Maybe it can get to something like that later down the road, but at this point here, you still need to flash the BIOS, and in case there are any firmware updates for the actual screen itself, you're going to have to install those as well. I did also check with Belika on this as well too, asking about, hey, whenever there's a SteamOS update, how is that going to be handled here? And this is where you're kind of going to need to babysit your installation in a way, because you can't really just sit it and forget about it. If there is a SteamOS update and it does update the BIOS, that is going to wipe out the flashed BIOS that we put on there. So that means you'll have to take the whole process again of taking your Steam Deck, hooking it up to a dock, hooking that up to a secondary screen, and then going in there, booting into desktop mode on SteamOS. Make sure you download the latest version of the BIOS flashing utility, and then go through the same process as patching and flashing the BIOS. Again, the screen firmware itself, you shouldn't have to update that unless there is an update that rolls out for it, but anytime there is a BIOS update that is flashed on there, you are going to have to do this as well. I will say, aside from that though, it seemed to go pretty seamlessly overall. Thankfully, it was well documented. It was an easy enough thing to install, at least for me. And when you actually get into SteamOS here and it's all working properly, look at that. Look at that. That is beautiful right there. You have all that extra real estate, and you can see that the touchscreen is working. So everything is all good at this point. You're now running this at 1920 by 1200 resolution. Now I'm even going to throw up some comparisons here as well too, and I'll say this because you can go to the DeckHD.com website and you can see a comparison for the colors for yourself, and this was a little bit difficult to see on video. I really capture it, so I do apologize for that. And unfortunately, as I said, I only have one deck. This is the only deck that I was working with here, so I don't have like a stock deck that I can really compare this to, but I've always noticed that the screen colors on the default Steam Deck screen always seem to be a little too washed out for my liking. I will say I'm someone, for example, where I still regularly play on my Switch OLED because I just really like that as like a nice comfy handheld, but also the screen on there is lovely. And while you're not going to get the same richness as a OLED on here, the screen is definitely nicer and I can tell a difference. Now, if you're looking at the video footage the comparisons here, and you're not seeing a huge difference. Again, that is a little bit hard to convey on video here accurately, so I do apologize for that. But I'll also say here as well too, if you're one of those people where you look at the screen and you're like, I don't see any issue with this, I think my stock screen is fine, this product might not be specifically for you. However, when it comes down to this, I can say objectively, it is really nicer having the anti-glare coating if you don't have a system with anti-glare coating on it. It is nicer also having that nicer, higher resolution, just because I like being able to navigate the Steam OS itself with that. And on top of that, I'm one of those weird people where I actually kind of use this as my laptop. I actually dual boot Steam OS on here with Windows. I use a Windows 11 install, and I do Windows to go on the micro SD card itself right here. Is it the best setup? Not so much, but it works well enough for what I need it to do. And there was actually one issue that I ran into there, which it even like threw Belika for a loop, which was really funny. I did run into an issue where everything was working fine here, but on Windows 11, when I booted up into my Windows 11 installation, the Steam Deck was working, but the screen, black. I could hook it up to my dock, I could hook it up to my TV, and it was able to display there. I was able to recognize the DeckHD screen itself within Windows, but black. The screen was on, but it was just straight black. That's what it was. So what he ended up kind of thinking here was there might just be an issue with the Windows installation itself, which I said, you know, yeah, it could be. One thing with Windows to Go is you can't really update that properly. Like, you can't go to newer versions properly. So I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to wipe it out. I'm going to reinstall it. And that actually ended up fixing it. So the nice thing is, I do have this working on Windows itself too. That works just fine. Make sure, of course, you go in, you download all of the drivers that Valve provides for this. Because once you have the drivers, the screen goes from looking okay to looking beautiful within Windows itself. So that was really nice. But I will say, even though this is only a 7-inch screen, because I do a little bit of productivity on here, like if I need to open up a spreadsheet real quick and I'm laying on my couch, I can do that here. Going from the 1280 by 800 resolution to 1920 by 1200 resolution, so much nicer on here. So that's been really cool. Now, my overall thoughts on this when I've been using it and such, I will say, again, I've really been playing a couple games on here, Stray and Vampire Survivors. Now, I have noticed that, like, the differences I can see that I can kind of point out is in, like, Stray, for example, I'm able to see the green on the grass at the beginning is richer on the DeckHD screen as opposed to the stock screen. You can also see the same thing, kind of similar, just better colors and such within Vampire Survivors itself. Some people might also be wondering what the resolution difference makes. I will say this, when you start playing your games and you just boot them up straight up on here, they're still going to run at 800p. Like, SteamOS itself is going to be running at 1200p, but when you actually get in game, it's still going to be 800p. So I noticed that they did look better, like the screen is nicer quality on there, but the resolution really didn't change on that. So I was looking into how to change that, and Belika did thankfully guide me through that there. What you want to do is you're going to want to go in, and when you open up a game itself, you're going to want to tap on the game. Then you're going to, instead of playing, go all the way to the right, find the gear, go into the settings there, and for the resolution, you're going to change it from default to native. And that way, when you go to boot up the game, it is going to boot into 1200p. Now, for people who might be wondering, oh my god, this is going to be great, this is going to be a game changer here, well, I'll put it like this. If you have played your Steam Deck at high resolutions on an external monitor, you're really going to run into the same issue here, which is that 800p was chosen as this resolution because it is a nice low resolution that seems to work well on this type of screen form factor right here. Remember, all we did was upgrade the screen. We didn't upgrade any of the internals on here, aside from, unless you chose to, like you put new thermal paste on or you put in a new SSD or what have you. But when it comes down to that, it's just the nature of how this works here. You're probably going to get a performance drop in your game. So when it comes to actually playing games at a 1200p resolution, unless you are willing to bring down the graphical and performance settings on there or just kind of adjust to a new standard, unfortunately, it's probably not going to be as good as you might have been expecting on there. I will say there are some games, for example, like Vampire Survivors, at 800p, beautifully, runs at 60 frames per second, no issue. Run it at 1200p, Same thing. It runs at 60 frames per second, no issue. A game like Stray, for example, you run it at 800p, and keep in mind, Stray doesn't really perform very well on PC, unfortunately, and that is kind of a known issue. I know it's gotten better for sure, but I personally played a lot of it on PlayStation 5, where it was just immaculate on there. But from what I understand, the PC port has just kind of had some issues there, although it's been getting better, mind you. But that's also why I picked it, because I wanted to pick something that was going to be a little more performance intensive on here. So when you're running it at 800p, the game targets 60 frames per second, and for the most part, it's pretty close. Yeah, it dips down to like 40 something, 50 something, it goes back up to 60. It doesn't stay locked at 60, but it aims for that pretty well. But I'll tell you, you run it at 1200p on here with the same settings, it is struggling to maintain 30 frames per second at that point. So that is a real good example right there. But again, that's not an issue of the screen itself. That's just the nature of the Steam Deck itself. And really the only fixes for that would be to run the game at a low resolution, to downgrade the graphics and performance settings on the game, or if there was a more powerful Steam Deck. Those are really the only fixes that it's going to run into. You would run into the exact same issue if you were playing on a desktop PC, and let's say it was an older PC and you're playing your games fine at 1080p, and then you get a 4K monitor and you are all of a sudden playing those same games at 4K. There's going to be some games that will probably play fine, and there's going to be other games that are really going to struggle at that point. So it's the exact same thing just right here, because remember, this is just a handheld PC. That's all it is. It's a good one, but it's a handheld PC. And it's really optimized for playing games at that lower 800p resolution. But even if you keep your games at that low resolution, they still look great on this screen. Now, what would my recommendation be for the DeckHD right here? I will say, I actually really like this. I think it is a cool kit. I absolutely love the price point of it as well, too. Again, shout out to them. I was able to get this for free for review here, but at only $99, you get a complete kit here. And yeah, it doesn't have thermal paste. It doesn't have a hair dryer. It doesn't have isopropyl alcohol in it, but those are all things that you're going to have to bring to the table yourself. I absolutely love that it also came with the toolkit on there. So as long as you have the other stuff on the side, you have pretty much everything in the box in order to do this at a $99 price point, and I think that's great. I really do love, especially if you're someone who you want that extra resolution boost, whether it be for games or maybe just performance type things, like you use desktop mode a lot in SteamOS, or if you have Windows and you're doing stuff on there and you're like me and you're weird and you're using it as a laptop, then the extra resolution boost is really nice as well too. And objectively, the screen on here is better. Plus, if you have a lower end deck, such as a 64 gig or a 256 gig, you end up getting the anti-glare coating on here. So that's really cool as well too. There's not too many downsides to this. The main downside I can really think of here is if you are afraid of doing the physical install, this might not be for you. You might have to find someone or pay someone to do it. Also, again, this isn't necessarily a thing that I would say you can safely just install and forget about it for 8 years. Because it does require a BIOS patch, and because the Steam Deck does get regularly updated, that is going to be something to keep in mind. So do keep in mind whenever you are updating your BIOS, and BIOS updates are far and few in between. I think Belika told me there's been like 2 this year. But do keep in mind, whenever there's a BIOS update directly from Valve themselves for Steam, you are going to have to go back into desktop mode and make sure that you patch the BIOS yet again to work with the DeckHD. At least that's how it is right now. I feel like it's probably always going to be some kind of thing like that where you will have to babysit it in a way, but that's just how it goes. I personally don't mind doing that. I kind of like the modding hacky side of this, as you can probably tell from my channel here. So I don't really mind doing a little bit of upkeep like that for the nice benefit of the screen here. Again, I like the kit here. I like the screen. I think that it is priced incredibly well. And I believe if you have a decent interest in this and you think this might benefit you, I would say that this is a good, worthwhile pickup on here. If you're looking at this and you're saying, this is too much work, the default screen for me is fine, I don't really care about the extra resolution, I can't even really tell the difference that much between the colors on there, like, yeah, the colors might be better, but the screen is okay, then this is not the product for you. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Just do keep in mind, if you're going to get one of these, you will kind of have to babysit that install in a way. Just really make sure you keep that BIOS patch in mind, and if there's a future firmware update for the screen, make sure you have that as well too. I will say, I thought about this a lot, and I think I have a really good use case for this here. And this is if you are someone where you want to save a little bit of money, you don't mind tinkering a little bit, and you want to have some fun along the ways. I think this is probably one of the best use cases for this. You see, I ended up doing this on a 512 gigabyte Steam Deck model. So that is the highest end of it, and it retails before tax. Everything here is before tax. It retails for $650 US brand new. Well, recently, at the time of recording, Valve has actually started rolling out a certified refurbished program. And it seems like you can now buy at a discount a used but refurbished Steam Deck. And these refurbished Steam Decks actually seem to be working pretty dang well, funny enough. So I didn't really have any doubts there, but they seem to be good coming out of the factory. So if you don't mind a refurbished unit, you might want to look into that. And I will say this, if you have a 512 gigabyte unit, you might not really want to do that there. You might want to do this on a lower end unit. So this is my proposal, right? Look into getting a 64 gigabyte model. A 64 gigabyte model retails for $400 brand new. And if you can get a certified refurbished one, you can get one of these for $320 refurbished. At that point, you can then get a DeckHD, which is going to give you a nicer screen, better resolution, more color depth on here, and it's going to have the anti-glare coating that only the higher end model has, the highest end model has for a stock deck. You can then get all of that on your lower end deck for $100 more. So at that point, you're spending $420 to have a nice upgraded screen on the lower end version of the deck. And on top of that, SSD upgrades are quite popular for the Steam Deck itself. There's a lot of people who buy the 64 gigabyte version and they install their own SSD on there and they put SteamOS on that, and they're able to play everything beautifully, and it just works really well. So that's also another good opportunity. Right before this video, I ended up quickly looking up prices for the SSD form factor that goes into the Steam Deck here, and the 1 terabyte for these form factors of SSD is pretty popular. I was able to see 1 terabytes ranging anywhere from $70 to $110. So let's just put it at $100, right? So let's say you decide to do all this, and really because you're opening this all up, and I'll say this, if you can handle doing the hardware installation, you can handle putting in a new SSD. If you can handle the software side of this, you can handle putting in an SSD. That's all fine. Now, you might want to install the SSD first and get everything up and running, and then install the screen itself, or vice versa. You might not want to do both at the exact same time. But what I'm saying here is, if you want to save a little bit of money, and if you really want to drastically upgrade your deck and really get an edge on this, this is a good option here. I think this is a good configuration. Get yourself a Steam Deck 64 gigabyte refurbished model for $320 if you can. Get a DeckHD for $100. Get a 1 terabyte SSD for about $100. So at that point, you're $520 in there. And with a little bit of time and effort, you're able to get yourself a Steam Deck with double the storage of the stock 512 gigabyte model and a better screen for less than the cost of that. I think that is an awesome deal right there, and I think that is really, in my opinion, the ideal scenario if you're really wanting to pimp out your deck, so to speak. So that's all there is to it here. This is the DeckHD. I've enjoyed it. I think this is a really nice screen. I'm definitely getting the nice benefit on here, and I don't have too much bad to say about it, really. I thought it was a fun install as well, too, and it seems to just be a really hardy product. So if you're interested in getting one of these here, I'm going to have a link to DeckHD down below in the description, of course, along with all the other install things like the firmwares and all that fun stuff if you want to follow along with this and have some fun and install it yourself. Let me know what you all think of it, and if you all are looking forward to the DeckHD, if you even have a DeckHD, do let me know. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you again to FX Technology Limited as well as Balika011 for reaching out and sending me one of these to review, install, and talk about for you all here. And of course, you all. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.